Follow along, Catholic pilgrims, as we follow French doctor of the Church, St. Francis de Sales, through his book, Introduction to the Devout Life. Tune in as we read through this practical guide for living out the Catholic faith well. It's a beautiful day, Catholic pilgrims, because we are alive and we have another day to grow closer to God. And it's another day to learn from St. Francis de Sales. You would be hard-pressed to find a Christian that says that they have an affection for the sin that they engage in. We would never want to really admit that. But the hard truth is, there are some sins that we struggle to let go of because we like them. We may even let them go and cease committing them, but our heart may still desire to commit them. And that is what we will be talking about today. So turn your book to chapter 7 of the first part, where St. Francis will discuss purification from the affection to sin. Chapter 7, Purification from the affection to sin. All the children of Israel actually departed from Egypt, but they did not all depart heartily. Wherefore, in the desert, some of them regretted the flesh, the melons, the leeks, and onions of Egypt. And so some penitents, though they forsake sin outwardly, do not forsake the love of sin. That is to say, they resolve to sin no more, but it is with reluctance that they abstain from the fatal delights of sin. Their hearts renounce it and seek to depart, but they frequently look longingly behind them, as did Lot's wife. They abstain from sin as a sick man abstains from dainties, which the physicians tell him will be fatal to him if he eats thereof. He abstains, but most unwillingly. He talks about them and measures how far he may transgress. At least he would fain behold what he desires, and envies those who can indulge in what is forbidden to him. Thus these weak, cowardly penitents for a while refrain from sin, but reluctantly. They would fain be able to sin and yet escape condemnation. They have still all the taste for forbidden gratification, and count those happy who enjoy it. Thus a man who is bent on revenge will change his mind whilst he is in confession, but directly after, he will find a satisfaction in discussing the subject of his dispute among his friends, saying that but for the fear of God, he would do so and so, that it is hard to forgive, would he might lawfully seek revenge, and so forth. Is not this man still hindered with the inclinations of sin? And although he has come out from Egypt, are not his tastes and affections lingering there with its leeks and garlic? So also with the woman who, having abandoned her unlawful attachments, still delights in admiration. Alas, such persons are in great danger. But you, my daughter, since you desire to commence the devout life, must not only forsake sin, but wholly cleanse your heart of all attachments to sin. For besides the danger of relapse, these wretched affections enfeeble the spirit and weigh it down, so that you cannot be ready, constant, and diligent in performing good works, in which lies the very essence of devotion. A soul which, having forsaken actual sin, is yet always encumbered with this languishing inclination, reminds me of a person who is not ill, but yet is pale, ailing in all his functions, eating without appetite, sleeping without rest, laughing without gladness, and who instead of walking briskly, drags himself wearily along. Such a soul performs good actions, but with such spiritual languor as to deprive them of all grace, and to make them scanty and ineffective. I've probably mentioned this before in previous seasons, but I am gluten intolerant. My mother has full-blown celiacs, and she's graciously passed on her gluten intolerance gene to me, my siblings, and 2 of my kids. We aren't as bad as her, but we do suffer in our various ways when we eat gluten. So, for most of my life, excluding the last 11 years of being gluten free, I suffered horribly from hypoglycemia. And real quick, that's where your blood sugar tanks and you get all shaky and irritable. And there have been times when I've been basically unresponsive because I've needed so badly to raise my blood sugar levels. And it was getting worse and worse. And I was worried that I was going to have real negative impacts to my health. And I felt terrible most days, very sluggish, tired. I always had to nap. But then when my mom discovered that she had celiacs and we all realized that the rest of us also had symptoms, I went gluten-free to see if it helped my problem because hypoglycemia is a symptom of being gluten intolerant. My issue cleared up almost immediately when I went gluten-free. Unless I get weeded, which means I accidentally eat gluten, I don't suffer like I used to, and I truly feel great. I have energy. I don't have to eat like every half hour to keep my blood sugar up. I rarely, if ever, nap anymore. I feel really, really good. And I know that being gluten-free is good for my body because I was headed down a bad path, health-wise. The crazy thing is that people pretty consistently try to coax me into eating gluten. They'll say things like, would a little bit hurt? Couldn't you just have a little bite here or there? Don't you miss all the foods with gluten in them? And the honest truth is, no, not really. I mean, I joke all the time about how I miss Krispy Kreme donuts, but the truth is, I don't desire anything with gluten in it because the temporary pleasure of eating it does not outweigh the suffering I will go through if I do eat it. So I honestly have no affection for things with gluten in them. My body has been purged of it, and I don't want to go back. I don't envy people who eat it, and I also don't grumble that I can't. And I hope you can see where I'm going with this. We have to get to this point with sin. St. Francis talks about how some of the children of Israel, once they were free from Egypt, desired to go back to where they were in slavery. But why? Well, because there was better food there. They were willing to give up freedom for some tastier food. And God was providing food, but that wasn't the food that they wanted. They wanted the leeks and onions and melons. We are like this with sin too. There are certain sins that we know we shouldn't want to commit, but we do secretly in the depths of our hearts. And so even though we may refrain from committing them, we still desire to commit them. We have an affection for them. And we see this very heavily with sexual sins. St. Francis says, quote, they abstained from sin as a sick man abstains from dainties, which the physician tells him will be fatal if he eats them. Thereof he abstains, but most unwillingly. He talks about them and measures how far he may transgress. At least he would fain behold what he desires, and envies those who can indulge in what is forbidden to him. They have still all the taste of forbidden gratification, and count those happy who enjoy it, unquote. If we truly understood what sin does to us, and I might add, how our personal sin added to the suffering of Jesus' suffering during his passion, we would never desire those sins we have an affection for. Just as I don't want to eat gluten because I truly understand what it does to me, we should have the same understanding about what sin does to our soul. There is no sin that's temporary pleasure can outdo the glory and pleasures of heaven. And it definitely won't be worth the possibility of losing grace and meriting hell. St. Francis says something at the end that I think is worth reading again. Speaking of the soul that refrains from sin but still desires it, he says, quote, A soul which, having forsaken actual sin, is yet always encumbered with this languishing inclination, reminds me of a person who is not ill and yet is pale, ailing in all his functions, eating without appetite, sleeping without rest, laughing without gladness, and who, instead of walking briskly, drags himself wearily along. Such a soul performs good actions, but with such spiritual languor as to deprive them of all grace and to make them scanty and ineffective." Unquote. That is no way to live a life. Better to purge our affection from the sin that holds us back from truly living. We'll end here for today, Catholic pilgrims. As you go about your day today, remember to live the faith boldly and travel well.